want to kick off our conversation tonight with a man who I'm delighted has joined me in the studio and very pleased to be able to speak to tonight. Adam Ma'anit is a British-Israeli campaigner for the hostages whose cousin, Tsaki Idan, was taken hostage by Hamas on the 7th of October and is still in captivity. Adam, I know another member of your family was sadly brutally killed by Hamas on the 7th of October. So for you, like so many, this is a very, very personal story. We'll come on to the situation in Lebanon. I want to talk to you more about the Israeli government stance on this in just a moment. But the obvious question, I think, to start with is about Tsaki. What do you know, if anything, what have you been told about him, his situation and how he is?
Well, we don't know anything. As UN Secretary General Guterres just recently condemned Hamas for not allowing the Red Cross to visit the hostages. They've never been visited by any kind of neutral party as required under the Geneva Convention, so we don't actually have any kind of independent verification of their welfare. The only time we've ever had any kind of news about Tsaki was when Hamas sent us a psychological warfare kind of video where they were basically taunting us with his video, and they treated it like a game show. They said they made him say some things, and then at the end they left it open as a question: is he alive or is he dead? And they left a big red question mark and the characteristic inverted red triangle that is now ubiquitous on the streets of London and elsewhere, representing Hamas's sort of propaganda branding. They never answered the question, so we're left with that open-ended question of is he alive or is he dead?
And the Israeli authorities have not been able to give you any...
They've not confirmed that he's dead, so we are presuming he's still alive.
You presume he's still alive. How much do you worry, Adam, that the plight of the hostages is sort of being increasingly sidelined and marginalised from the conversation about tensions in the Middle East, now the war with Lebanon and so on? I mean, it's so important, isn't it, that their plight remains central to this in a way that... I don't know. Is that happening enough?
Well, clearly not. I mean, it's one thing. In the beginning, the first few weeks, it was really, it felt like it was on the top of the news agenda. It felt like many of the hostage families were able to kind of get interviews on news channels everywhere. And then as the war progressed and the news cycle moved on, it became really difficult to hear much about the hostages. We do a lot of public campaigning in Brighton to try to raise awareness about the plight of many of the hostages who have British-connected relatives here. Mm-hmm. And what we found just talking to ordinary people on the street was that they didn't even realize there were any hostages at all.
They didn't realize that people
at
were still in
all,
captivity?
that hostages was still a thing,
Wow.
that they didn't realize that there were hostages in Gaza, and they certainly didn't know that there were British citizens and people with British relatives. Wow. Certainly in Gaza, and there is still a British citizen. Emily Damari is a British citizen. She's still captive in Gaza. My cousin, I'm a British Israeli. My cousin Tsaki is a hostage. There's several others, some of whom we know are dead. Nevertheless, we still want them to be returned home.
And to that end, you were meeting with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and David Lammy, I think the Foreign Secretary, in Downing Street today. I appreciate you might want to go into the sort of the confidential elements of that conversation, Adam, but what was the gist of it? And did you come out of it confident that the UK government is doing all it can to secure the release of people like Tsaki and the others?
My message to the government, my message to the Prime Minister is the same as my message to everyone. I've been at the UN last week. I've been speaking to heads of state as often as I can, dignitaries and so on. And I think none of us are doing enough. I'm not doing enough. You're not doing enough. Keir Starmer's not doing enough. David Lammy's not doing enough. None of us are doing enough. And the reason we know that is because hostages aren't home.
What more practically in practice can be done?
Well, I don't think there's enough pressure being put on Hamas. We hear a lot about pressure on Israel, and I think there is a lot of pressure on Israel and the Israeli government. There's a lot of pressure from within Israel. There certainly has plenty of critics within the Israeli society about the government's handling and prioritization. What we don't hear enough about is I'm not hearing a lot of pressure on Hamas. Are you? I mean, we know, for example, that the Politburo of Hamas are based in Doha, living in the lap of luxury. One of the men who heads up their external relations department was convicted for the bombing that killed my 16-year-old cousin in the Second Intifada in a bombing in Haifa at an Israeli Arab restaurant. He was convicted for that. He was heading up Hamas's West Bank operations at the time. And he was released in the Gilad Shalit deal, and now he lives in a lap of luxury in Doha, heading up Hamas's external operations. I get press releases from Hamas's Telegram with his face on it.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on it there. There has been a lot of pressure, clearly, on the Israeli government too. A lot of the hostage families say to the Prime Minister Netanyahu, the hostages could be home tomorrow if a deal was struck. Do you feel that your government, and yours, I say, is Israeli rather than the British element of your nationality, do you feel that enough has been done by them to bring Tzachi and the others home?
The Israeli government?
The Israeli government.
No. Same message. I don't think they have. I think their attention is split across several different priorities, understandably. They've certainly not been signaling the right, making the right noises. They've not certainly been giving hostage families much information. There's been a lot of really negative rhetoric about some aspects of this crisis that we're in. What I would say is that, it's very difficult to surmise exactly what the plans are, and some things have to understandably be secret. Mm-hmm. For example, for hostage families, we also have to make a calculation. If the more I speak about my cousin, the more I make his name well known and he's seen in the media, does that harm his chances of survival? These are the kinds of questions. We've had hostage specialists who've advised us for months. I didn't speak to the media because that was while the negotiations felt like there might be some possibility of resolution and they were feeling like they were quite a tangible thing, we were worried that if we gave too much attention to Tzachi's plight, that he might be considered a high value asset, and that might jeopardize his life. These are the kinds of insane calculations we have to make all the time. I can't just speak candidly all the time, and I can understand that various governments can't either. That said, I think that everybody has to also see it as an opportunity to get us all out of this crisis. The demands for ceasefire are coming at the wrong order. If we want the swiftest way to get a ceasefire, the swiftest way to start beginning to bring in more aid, to talk about a pathway towards peace and all of these other things that all of the heads of states of various people talking heads on this issue are talking about, the swiftest way to do that is to secure the release of the hostages, to bring them home.
But it seems to me, Adam, there's a sort of split between amongst the hostage families, certainly within Israel, as to whether the way to get those hostages home, which is everybody's aim, is through force, effectively, by seizing them by force from Hamas, or whether it's through diplomacy and negotiation and a ceasefire agreement. And that seems to be the split. Where are you on that? Is a ceasefire now the best way to get something
Again, I would change the order. I think that if the international community, if the United Nations, if all of the leaders of the world united under that one singular purpose of returning the hostages, it then opens up all of the other pathways. It then allows us to, establish a ceasefire. It allows us to rebuild. It allows us to bring in aid. It allows us to
So you would say that's a precursor
repair.
to a ceasefire deal?
I do, and I think that they don't. The reason why we're stuck is because we keep conditioning it, and that's what the message I had to the Prime Minister today is that please stop conditioning hostages with any other aspect that you would like to see happen.
They're not a bargaining.
It's an unconditional request, demand to release the hostages. It should be unequivocal. At this point, they've been there nearly a year. We know that their conditions are horrible. The last 6 hostages who were found executed were riddled with bullet holes. They had signs of abuse, signs of torture, neglect, poor hygiene. Eden Yerushalmi, a 26-year-old young woman, was found at 36 kilograms, which is about 77 pounds. She was starving to death. She should have been double that weight. We know that the hostages are not in a good way. This is a humanitarian issue, and it should be treated as a humanitarian issue, not a political issue. Hostages have been released in the past on humanitarian grounds, and at this point, every hostage that's been there for a year is basically a humanitarian issue. They need to be returned home. That's inhuman torture, a war crime, and bringing them home also then again allows us to open up possibilities, new pathways for peace.
Let me just ask you finally, if I could, Adam, about what's happening as you and I speak right now in Lebanon, or at least the Lebanese border. You said you were worried about the sort of the plight of the hostages being almost sort of eroded, degraded by everything else that's going on. Is this new front in the war? Is this new sort of the stepping up of attacks on Hezbollah, this what seems to be an imminent invasion of Lebanon? I mean, that's only going to make that worse. That is not going to help the plight of the hostages, is it?
Unclear. I mean, again, I'm not a master tactician. I'm not a strategist. I'm not a politician or a military man. Could it be a ruse so that Hamas think that the IDF are distracted so that they can launch some kind of dawn raid and operation on a tunnel? Who knows? I mean, there's all sorts of things that we have to kind of. We've seen what Israel can do in the last few weeks, and some of it's quite spectacular. So who knows? Maybe something else is cooking. I don't know. I also know it would be unfair to not talk about the plight of the 60,000 Israeli civilians who've had to flee their homes in northern Israel. Since October 8th, Hezbollah has been raining down rockets on the communities, civilian communities around north of Israel, and we've had to basically evacuate. I've had friends who've lived in those communities and have had to flee and are living now in Tel Aviv in hotels and so on, and the largesse of their friends. We've had Jewish children killed playing football by Hezbollah rockets. Enough is enough. I mean, we can't live like that. People, we have evacuated communities in the south. We have evacuated communities in the north. We have Houthis firing missiles, ballistic missiles into central Tel Aviv. I mean, at some point, something has got to give. So I don't blame the government for trying to do something about it.
Adam, thank you very much indeed for coming in. That's Adam Manit, British-Israeli campaigner for the hostages. As you were just hearing, Adam's cousin, Saki Adan, taken by Hamas into Gaza on the 7th of October. Saki's daughter, eldest child, Mayan, just turned 18, shot dead by Hamas on that date too. Adam, thank you very much again.